Our group will be presenting on the role of ICRC in the implementation of IHL.
International humanitarian law was known as the law of armed conflict, where it adheres to uphold the humanity principles and to reduce or mitigate the armed conflict between the states. And it functions or it acts as an enforcement to ensure the states adhere to the legal treaties. And it is important where IHL develop a neutral and also very significant stand, especially by the ICRC, to enforce the particular of this law. And this research will enforce or emphasize by looking on the role of ICRC in the implementation of the IHL.
Research problem. There is a compliance gap where treaties are insufficient now to stop horrors of wars, as IHL requires active, practical implementation and monitoring to minimize civilian suffering. And now, warfare has evolved into asymmetric warfare, advanced weapon technologies, and making it increasingly more complex to ensure that states adhere to the distinction and proportionality principles. We need a neutral actor like the ICRC, so that states' compliance cannot rely on only political entities alone, but it requires some independent, sui generis, non-state actor to securely negotiate with all parties. This paper, however, will map out specific legal frameworks and unique authorities granted to the ICRC under the 1949 Geneva Conventions and additional protocols. And we will evaluate operational strategies to examine the practical mechanisms, strategies, and confidential dialogues the ICRC employs to monitor and encourage IHL compliance. And finally, we will clarify the unique mandate to provide a precise understanding of how the ICRC operates as a neutral intermediary and the ultimate guardian of humanitarian principles.
Well, let's look through the legal framework. Basically, ICRC gains its mandate on these three important legal treaties. First and foremost was the Geneva Conventions 1949, and also the Additional Protocols 1 and Additional Protocols 2. And ICRC basically implement and works with adhering by these three treaties, especially regarding addressing the intentional armed conflict, non-intentional armed conflict, and also humanitarian relief in this situation.
Next, I will explain the case. Okay, first we can see case study, which the tribunal ruled that Common Article 3 applies as customary law to internal armed conflicts, which then this gives the ICRC immense leverage, which state can no longer block ICRC access by shifting the definitions and claiming a civil war is just like a minor internal disturbance. And next, the case of celibacy. In this case, it's documented horrific abuses in detention camps. It serves as a grim judicial record of what happens when independent external scrutiny is missing. Which then this case also highlights that why the ICRC's treaty-based rights to visit detainees without witnesses is fundamentally irresponsible. Because while courts punish harm after it happens, the ICRC's role is strictly preventive. Thirdly, in the case of Icrc, which this case expanded the accountability by ruling that IHL binds non-state actors without formal military status. This perfectly mirrors the ICRC's operational stance that Common Article 3 binds each party to the conflict without the qualification. Okay, for the last case is case CIMIC, which this case is unique because it directly protects the ICRC's operational methodology, which the court recognized the ICRC's absolute right to refuse to testify, ruling that maintaining absolute confidentiality is vital. If courts force the ICRC to reveal the secrets, warring parties will immediately withdraw their trust and bar the ICRC from saving lives on the battlefield. So in conclusion, these cases demonstrate a symbiotic dual threat relationship, which Tadi and Icrc cases expand substantive protections. Celibacy proved that the need for life prevention, and CIMIC shows the ICRC's confidentiality. While courts use retrospective force and the ICRC uses real-time dialogue, they ultimately reinforce one another to protect human dignity.
Moving on to our recommendation, there are 4 key measures that can further strengthen the implementation of the international humanitarian law by the ICRC. Firstly, states should strengthen the domestic implementation of IHL by adopting comprehensive national legislation, improving military training, and establishing national IHL committees. This measure help ensure that humanitarian obligations are effectively implemented at the national level. Secondly, the dissemination of IHL should be expanded through education and awareness programs targeting armed force, non-state armed groups, and civilians. Greater understanding of IHL promotes voluntary compliance and helps reduce violation during armed conflict. Thirdly, greater support should be provided to the ICRC. States should continue to safeguard the ICRC neutrality, independence, and humanitarian access, while providing sufficient political and financial support to enable it to carry out its humanitarian mandate effectively. Lastly, cooperation between the ICRC and international accountability mechanism should be strengthened. While the ICRC focuses on preventing violation through humanitarian engagement, international courts ensure accountability after violation occur. Together, this complementary approach can better promote compliance with international humanitarian law. To conclude our presentation, ICRC ICRC remains the cornerstone of implementing international humanitarian law through its neutrality, independence, and internationally recognized mandate under the Geneva Convention and additional protocols. The ICRC plays a vital role in protecting civilian, monitoring detention condition, delivering humanitarian assistance, promoting compliance with IHL, and engaging with both states and the non-state armed groups during armed conflicts. However, the implementation of IHL continues to face significant challenge due to the evolving nature of modern warfare, including the rise of non-state armed groups, technological advancement, and restriction on humanitarian access. Therefore, stronger cooperation among states, international organizations, and the ICRC is essential. At the same time, greater dissemination of IHL and stronger domestic implementation measures are needed to improve compliance with humanitarian obligations. In conclusion, although the ICRC does not possess enforcement power like international courts, its preventive humanitarian approach and trusted neutrality make it indispensable in protecting victims and upholding the principle of humanity during armed conflicts. That's all from our group. Thank you.